So I think we can all agree that sometimes embarrassing moments are like the worst thing ever. How many of you've had a moment like in that video where you're like going to do something epic and then you like slip and fall in front of everybody and it's like, oh, whoops. And then you're like immediately humbled because that was embarrassing, right? And you kind of want to like hide your face for the rest of the time. Like I've had too many of those experiences to count, many of them at the swimming pool because, you know, they say don't run, but you're at a pool and how can you not run, right? And so I always run and somehow end up slipping and scraping my leg, falling into the pool embarrassingly, flailing everywhere or something like that. And there's just times in your life when you do things and it seems like in that moment, your whole life is defined by what just happened. And everybody's looking at you and you feel like, you know, how many of you like you turn beet red when you're embarrassed? Like there's no hiding when you're embarrassed. There's some of you can hide it. You can kind of like just, you know, act cool. I guess it's not a big deal, right? But wasn't my Siri. But there's some times where you just like, you can hide it. But there's others of you that you can't hide it. You turn like beet red and then you like start sweating or maybe your skin starts breaking out and you're like, don't look at me, right? Because you're just like, embarrassing moments are absolutely the worst. There's one time, I was a bit younger than all of you, but I had a couple issues growing up. So I slept really hard. How many of you are hard sleepers? Like you close your eyes, you're out, nothing can wake you. My dad always joked that he could carry me, drop me twice in the living room, and then put me in my bed and I wouldn't wake up. And it was probably true. And I wouldn't know because anyway. But I remember growing up, like when I was little, like first grade. First grade's little, right? They're little. It's not going to be embarrassing once I tell you this. Don't judge me based off this story. But when I was in first grade, I still wet the bed because I slept so hard that like I still had to wear pull-ups. Okay, my mom changed my sheets like every night because I could not hold my bladder while I was asleep, right? So I was potty trained, no problem, since like 3, but not at night. And so I remember I was at church camp, place you should trust people, right? And I start, you know, saying, yeah, well, we were all telling embarrassing things about each other, and said, well, I still wear a pull-up because I can't control my bladder at night. Right, and I'm being vulnerable, first grade me, and they're like, okay. Well, then they went and looked through my stuff to find my pull-ups, and I remember the rest of the week, I walked up to canteen, like that afternoon, and everybody was laughing at me, calling me diaper boy. It was sad, but it's okay. You can give me your sympathy later. But the point of the story is, for that rest of the week, I felt like shamed. I was like, nobody knows me. They just know that I wet the bed at night, right? And it was like one of the worst things ever. And so I'm happy to tell you I'm fully potty trained nowadays. I haven't wet the bed in years, so I'm on a good streak right there. But at the time, man, let me tell you, having people know the most embarrassing part about me was like incredibly vulnerable and like just heart-wrenching because nobody was nice about it either, right? Except like some of the adult leaders. It's okay, Zach. It's normal to be late sometimes. And you know, it's just one of those things that, you know, you look back on and you're thankful that, you know, you grew tough skin and, you know, now people can laugh at you and it only kind of bothers you, right? But you guys know what it's like to be in a situation where maybe your biggest flaw is on display. Or maybe you just do something silly like in that video and everybody's watching and you feel like that moment has defined you for the rest of your social life. You're going to have to wait till you graduate high school and move to a different town for college before you can start over again because everybody you grow up with is going to remember you as that person. Sometimes it just shapes people's opinions of you. Have you guys found that to be true? That maybe you do something and all of a sudden everybody's opinions are shaped by that one thing. Maybe you were a good kid, you know, but you got caught doing something at school you shouldn't have been doing, and then everybody knows why you're suspended, right? And you come back and you feel like that kind of shaped everybody's opinion of you. And see, as we go through this series, we've been talking about the idea of influence. You guys remember what influence is? I have a definition for you up here. It's the ability to impact behavior, thoughts, and choices. It's this idea that you can have an influence, you can have an impact on somebody else's life, and maybe cause them to change the way that they're acting in order to act the way that you are acting. So influence can be good or it can be bad. Influence can be something that, people can influence you in great ways or bad ways. Your parents always sometimes say, like, don't hang out with that person, they're bad. What? They're bad influence on you, right? How many of you have heard your parents say that about somebody? And how many of you, that person is in the, no, I'm just kidding. Don't say that. But don't be that honest. Come on, guys. We're just Christians. We're not supposed to be that honest. No, I'm just kidding. I'm done now. I'm really tangent-y, and my mind is kind of like in La La Land right now. I'm still not used to coming back and meeting like this. How many of you are like, this is awesome, but it's kind of weird still. My brain is catching up. Also, I haven't had coffee yet today. So I feel like I may be overcompensating, and I'm sorry if I'm being annoying. So, influence is the ability to impact, have an impact on the people around you, or to make a difference in people's thoughts or decisions. It's a really cool thing if you've been given the platform or an opportunity to have influence on other people. It's sometimes a real honor. It's sometimes something that we don't take maybe as serious as we should, and maybe sometimes, as we've talked in the last couple of weeks, we don't realize when we actually do have influence. But remember, we all have the potential to influence other people. We talked about this in week 1. We all have the potential, no matter who you are, where you come from, what gifts or talents you have, whether you're an athlete, or you're in choir, or you're in band, or whatever your interests are, maybe you have no extracurriculars, you have the ability to influence somebody. And it just starts with taking what God has given you and using it for His glory, and setting that example, showing love to others. You have that ability to influence somebody. Everybody has the ability to influence other people, but because of that, it's kind of a double-edged sword. We all have the same ability to lose that influence. Kind of like I mentioned earlier, maybe you had a good reputation, but then you got caught in something you probably shouldn't have been a part of. Maybe you didn't even do something you weren't supposed to do, but you were guilty by association because you're around somebody else who did something they shouldn't have been doing. And maybe that kind of reputation suddenly shaped the way that people thought of you. And that influence that you had, that person who had credibility, maybe kind of went away. Now you're that person that whenever they look at you, they think of whatever that was. And it's kind of hard to live with. It's hard to walk into a room and wonder, what are people thinking about me? We all have the ability to influence somebody, but we all have the ability to lose that influence as well if we're not careful. You know this because it's either happened to you or you've seen it happen to somebody else. And that's kind of an awakening that we should recognize that this is something that is precious. Influence is not something to be taken lightly. It's something to be taken with a little bit of responsibility. But there is a way to find the influence that you think might be lost. So if you've ever been in a situation, or if you are ever going to be in a situation, which all of us will be at some point, where maybe you feel like you've lost credibility. Maybe you feel like you're not measuring up to the things that you should be doing. Maybe you don't feel like you're doing enough, or whatever it is. When you feel like you have lost all ability to have influence on those around you, I want you to remember that influence you think might be lost is not gone forever. And I know this, one, from personal experience, like I shared with you, but two, because of a guy named Peter. How many of you guys, you know who Peter is when we talk about the Bible? Peter was one of Jesus' closest disciples, but he had a reputation for a lot of things. He was a little bit rash at times. He would speak out of turn. He would say bold things, and sometimes it was boldly right, and sometimes it was boldly not right. And so Peter kind of, he was known for putting his foot in his mouth at times. But Peter, it's a figure of speech, right? Put his foot in it, like you say something that you regret. Yeah. And look it up is a thing. So Peter, he was just known for sometimes putting his foot in his mouth. And for doing things that, and saying things that he immediately regretted because either Jesus himself put him in his place, or somebody else did, or whatever it was. But he was one of Jesus' most trusted disciples. And actually, if we look through the New Testament and after the resurrection of Jesus, he actually is one of the ones, especially in the book of Acts, if you read that, then you see that he is one of the most influential people of the early church. He raised up the church and Christians from basically the time Jesus left until there were thousands and thousands of people who were following Jesus. He was huge in the early church. But he almost lost all of that influence. And where we're going to pick up the story is from Luke's account of Jesus' life. And I kind of set the scene for you. Jesus and his disciples have just had this really somber Last Supper where they broke bread and shared juice. And to represent Jesus' body and his blood, kind of like we just did a few minutes ago when we celebrated communion, it was the first communion. And then, they went and they prayed in a garden, and Peter fell asleep because he was tired. It was the middle of the night. But then Jesus got arrested, and then all of a sudden, they started to realize that Jesus was in some serious trouble. And so the disciples, they scattered. They didn't stick with Jesus. And Jesus is being tried in front of the religious leaders. And Peter, he wants to know what's happening, what's going to happen with Jesus, right? And so he puts on, his hood and goes and kind of blends in with the crowd, and he starts following what's happening. And here's what happens. Here's where we pick up our verse. A servant girl saw him seated there in the firelight. She looked closely at him and said, "This man was with him." But he denied it. "Woman, I don't know him," he said. He denied even knowing Jesus. So this is one of Jesus' closest disciples. This is like if your friends that you've grown up with your entire life and you were close, you spent weekends together. This would be like them coming with you to a new school when you go up to the intermediate school, or when you go up to the middle school building and you're in a new building and you start meeting some new friends and they all of a sudden pretend like they don't know you. How would that feel? Right? This is basically what Peter's doing to Jesus. I don't even know him, right? He's scared for his life, but he denies even knowing Jesus. And this says, the text, if you read on, it happens 2 more times, a total of 3 times. Peter denies even knowing Jesus. But what I want you to recognize is that Jesus doesn't allow our mistakes to be the end of our story. And what I know about Peter and what I know about us, and what Jesus ultimately did for us on the cross, is that our sins are forgiven. Right? Before the resurrection, our sins weren't really, truly forgiven. They weren't covered. There's a price to pay for sin, and that is death. But because of Jesus' sacrifice, our sins are forgiven. And so actually, when Jesus raises from the dead, and they meet up, and it's this happy moment, all the disciples reunite, they're back together, and that was a really dark moment, and but Jesus is alive, and it's better now, right? Well, they start meeting and they're having breakfast, and this is what happens. When they finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, remember, they hadn't really seen each other or talked since, Peter denied even knowing Jesus. So Jesus is talking to him. He says, "Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said. "You know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." And again, if you read in the text, he says it 2 more times. The same amount of times that Peter denied Jesus. Jesus says, "Do you love me?" And Peter acknowledges, yes. He gives Peter the opportunity to right his wrong, to realign himself with Christ, to say where his allegiance lies. But then also Jesus says, "Okay, feed my lambs." And it sounds like a weird metaphor, because how many of you have lambs, right? It's time to feed your sheep, right? It's weird. And Peter wasn't a shepherd, he was a fisherman. So what does Jesus mean, feed my lambs? Well, lambs follow somebody. You know what that is? Us. A shepherd. Yeah. Sheep follow shepherds. Sheep rely on the shepherds for food, for direction, for guidance. And so Jesus is saying, Peter, you're about to have a lot of influence. And you're going to have a lot of sheep that are following you. He's referring to the church. And I want you to feed them. He's saying you're going to have the influence to make a huge difference in this world despite what you've done. I want you to take what I've given you and I want you to feed my people. And we can move forward on a new path despite whatever has gone on in our lives, whatever mistakes we've made. Our mistakes do not define us. If there's anything I want you guys to walk away from, it's the fact that our mistakes do not define us. Our failures do not define us, because many of us will have many, many failures. And we're never going to be perfect this side of heaven. But God still wants to use us and use the influence that He's given us to make a difference. Jesus doesn't allow our mistakes to be in the story. And what I want you to recognize, and maybe some practical steps to do, is first off, ask yourself what might be causing you to lose influence, right? This may take a minute, because for some of you, you're like, well, I don't have any big bad things I've gotten in trouble for. I don't know, maybe that's true, but I want you to take a minute and think of something that might be causing you to lose influence, whether it's something that's going on in private that nobody knows about, or whether it's the way you talk about somebody behind their back and that just hasn't gotten back to them yet. But eventually all gossip does. Maybe it's the way that you're treating your siblings. I don't know what it is, but what are you doing? What is it in your life that potentially is causing you to lose some credibility, lose some influence when it comes to pointing people to Jesus? The number one, there's a DC Talk song. How many of you guys know who DC Talk is? Yeah. Yeah. They're known for Jesus Freak. So if you look up Jesus Freak on Spotify, it's like, what will people do? Anyway, you need to look it up. It'll change your life. So they were huge in the 90s. I was born in 92, so I grew up rapping to Toby Mac before he was Toby Mac, and before he was his own thing. And but DC Talk has a song, and at the beginning of one of the songs, it's just this narration. It says, the single biggest cause of atheism in the world today is Christians who claim God with their lips but deny Him with their actions. And if you want to take account of maybe where might you be losing influence, it's where in your life are your actions not lining up with your belief in God. So 2 is confess it to God. Whenever you kind of find out what that is, and sometimes that takes some prompting, it takes some asking those who know you, it takes some prayer, but confess those things to God. Tell Him about it. Tell Him you're struggling with it, why you're struggling with it, and confess it to Him. And number 3, take one step in the right direction, whether that's talking with a small group leader or to the person that maybe you've wronged, and go make it right, go apologize, whatever it is. Take one step in the right direction. Maybe that's just as simple as praying every morning and devoting yourself to God each day as a reminder that you are His. Remember, Jesus doesn't allow our mistakes to be the end of our story. And as you guys get ready to head into those small groups, I want you to think of this question. What's one thing in my life that may be causing me to lose influence? And if you think through that, don't feel down on yourself, because again, this is an encouraging message. But as you think about the influence that God has given you, I want you to think about what potentially is fighting against that influence that God is trying to give you. What is trying to take you off the platform that God has provided for you in order to change somebody else's life? Because you do have that ability. No matter what age you are, no matter what your skill set is, no matter what talents you have, whatever it is, God has given all of us the ability to influence someone. So let me pray, and then we'll go into our small groups.